Tonight, the general election campaign is now in full swing, and we're speaking to the only Stormont minister running for Parliament. The Alliance leader, Naomi Long, joins me live in the studio. He's the man who would be king or prime minister, at least if the polls are to be believed. But what can we expect from a Keir Starmer-led government?
He served us well in the period that he was here, and Northern Ireland owes Keir Starmer a great deal.
And with me to discuss those election issues and everything else in the campaign this week, commentators Suzanne Breen and David McCann. Hello, we've a lot of ground to cover in tonight's programme, just 3 weeks out from polling day, so let's dive straight in and hear from the leader of the Alliance Party, Naomi Long. Welcome to the programme. Alliance had just one seat in the last Parliament, Stephen Farry in North Down. You could well find on July the 5th that you're going back with 3 MPs, Mr Farry, yourself and Saoirse Eastwood, and presumably you'd say in those circumstances that the Alliance surge continues. But you could go back with none. What would you say then?
Well, I mean, I think first and foremost, Mark, the difference between those two scenarios and indeed other scenarios is probably a few hundred votes. So I think the key message for everybody before the election is to go out and vote because it will make a difference. But in terms of what I would say then, well, first of all, I would be very disappointed. I think Stephen is not just an asset to Alliance in Westminster, but is an asset to Westminster and to North Down. And so I would be incredibly disappointed in those circumstances. But obviously that's not the circumstance for which we're planning, nor is it the one we're working towards. We want to see increased representation in Westminster, and we want to see more people returned along with Stephen.
Every commentator and expert I've heard discussing those 3 constituencies, North Down, East Belfast and Lagan Valley, is saying they are pretty much too close to call, though your main unionist opponents in those seats might just shade it. The stakes are high for your party over the next 3 weeks, aren't they? Well,
of course, but the stakes are high for every party over the next 3 weeks. I mean, we're essentially the underdog in those 3 seats, even though Stephen is the incumbent. There's clearly a real push on to have him removed, and I've been in that situation myself in 2015, and I know the pressure that entails. But the bottom line is we're there to fight, we're there to fight to win, and we're going to continue to put our best foot forward. And from our perspective, we want to be represented in Westminster as we are in the Assembly and as we are at local government, because that representation across all levels of government is important to the party.
Well, that's interesting. Given how long it took you to make up your mind if you were going to run or not, it seems you weren't sure yourself that you could win or that you wanted to take the chance.
Well, it was neither of those things. The consideration for me, I guess, was very much a personal one. When the Assembly wasn't sitting, it was a very easy decision to decide to go to Westminster and to represent my constituents there, because there was an absence of democracy here. But with the Assembly restored, devolution restored, and the opportunity to serve in the Department of Justice, it was not an easy decision. And I've never lied about that. It was a difficult decision. But I had to reflect on where I felt I could bring most to the table in terms of both representing my constituents, but also trying to influence stability around devolution. And the main challenges that we have as a devolved Assembly are our finances, which are ultimately controlled by Westminster, and where I believe we can make a very strong argument. I mean, Stephen Farry was the first MP to make the case for a financial package for Northern Ireland. He's also the first MP to have raised the issue of fiscal rules and how those need to change so we can invest in the future. So we have an opportunity to stabilise things in terms of Northern Ireland finances. The other issue is about the instability
one voice out of 650. You might have 3. You might have 3 on a good day.
Yes, and when I was only one voice between 2010 and 2015, I tackled the issues of transparency in local party donations, and I tackled the issue of double jobbing and ended it. So don't underestimate what one strong and committed voice can achieve if we're able to persuade other people. But setting that aside, in terms of the Assembly, our other big challenge is stability. And the only way we're going to get change around the structures of the Assembly is to convince Westminster to legislate for that. That involves us working with the Irish government so that they do that in tandem.
What people might wonder is, well, OK, does the party's leader and only minister in the executive choosing to try to leave through this Assembly term actually send out a message that you're interested in stability? Well,
I'm not our only minister in the executive. Obviously, my colleague Andrew Muir is Minister for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. So we have 2 ministers in the executive. And the truth is that my reasons for going to Westminster are to make the case for the devolved institutions. It's not to undermine them or abandon them. I will still very much be part of the Northern Ireland political scene, whether I'm in Westminster or whether I remain as Justice Minister. But like any political party, we want to put forward our strongest candidates, and the case was made very strongly to me by my colleagues and also by my constituents that they wanted me to run in this election. And after reflection on where I felt I could make the most impact, I made that choice.
I should apologise to Andrew Muir for forgetting about him being in the executive.
Don't worry,
I hope he forgives me. So the question is this: are you, to be absolutely clear, are you serious that you actually want to be an MP in the House of Commons?
If I didn't want to be an MP, I would not be standing in this election.
Well, you might be standing because your party believes and you believe you're actually the only person who stands a snowball's chance in hell of taking that seat off Gavin Robinson.
And therefore, by extension, I must want to go to Westminster, because if I didn't, I wouldn't run and I would allow somebody else to cede the seat to the DUP. I'm running because I know there is a chance I will win. I'm running in the full knowledge that that could happen, and therefore I want to do the job. I wouldn't put my name on the ballot paper if I didn't, and with all due respect of all the persuasion that the party might bring to the door to get me to stand, if I didn't want to do it, I wouldn't be standing. OK, if you're going to win that seat on July the 4th, you're going to have to secure some degree of support in unionist areas. You'll need to appeal to soft U unionists, presumably. Is that the real reason you pulled out of Saturday's Ireland's Future event in Belfast? No, it isn't. And if that was a consideration, I wouldn't have said I was going to go to the Ireland's Future event, because it was always going to be in an election year. What we didn't expect was it was going to be in the election campaign, where my time as party leader is at a premium. And I have a diary commitment that I cannot shift, that I have to do on Saturday. And for that reason, I have no alternative but to be replaced. But we are still participating in the event. Nuala McAllister, former Lord Mayor, current member of the leadership team as
she's also a candidate,
Assembly.
so she's likely, like you, she'll also be very busy, but she's able to find time for it.
She's not the party leader. With all due respect, I have engagements with other candidates that Nuala doesn't. So Nuala is going to step in, and I think you've actually defeated the argument that we're stepping aside for political reasons, because we wouldn't then have sent a candidate. Yeah, but as you've said yourself, you're the party leader, so you're a much more significant figure with respect than Nuala McAllister is. Surely the truth is this: if you thought for 1 minute it would be to your advantage to be sitting on that Ireland's Future stage this weekend, you would have made it a priority to be there, wouldn't you? No, it's not that simple. I mean, I literally have, in a short campaign, very few Saturdays available to me to do the things which I have to do. But that's a big platform. But it is a big platform, but it's also, I have to weigh that against my other responsibilities. And your critics will take advantage of this and say that it looks like you're frit. And the fact, of course, that we will still be represented actively in the debate. So I had to balance all of those things, and it wasn't possible. But look, there will be further opportunities. And to be clear, I mean, me withdrawing from the Ireland's Future event isn't going to change any hardline unionist view of where I stand on the union. That's not what you're worried about. What you're worried about in East Belfast is the soft unionists who might be put off by seeing you sitting on a stage discussing constitutional change on the island of Ireland. You know that. It is not going to change their view, because they know where I stood for the last... It might change some people's view, and as you've said yourself, this could come down to a few hundred votes. Where they know I stand on this issue, I have stood for the last 23 years. People in East Belfast are well aware of my position. Those who criticise me for not taking a position on this are well aware that that is my position. And had I been on the platform, to be clear, it would not have been to endorse a united Ireland. It would have been to engage in a debate about the future. And we will have other opportunities to do that when I don't have other pressures on my time. OK, can you now then publicly confirm that you will attend the next Ireland's Future event you're invited to after the election? No, I can't confirm that right now. Why not? Because I don't know what the reason you're not going to this one is because you're too busy during the election campaign. You said it's not a big political decision. You're sending someone else. You decided to go under normal circumstances when you didn't think it was an election. Why would you not just say, listen, I can't go this week, but I'll go the next time? Because it depends on the event. This event was framed as a panel discussion and debate, and without prejudice to our position on the issue, we were able to participate in that. There have been previous events that we haven't participated in because they weren't framed in the same way. Let's say it's a similar event to this. It's framed in the same way. If it's framed in the same way, if it's a similar event to the one on the SSE Arena, I would be more than happy to take that opportunity up. And to be clear, Mark, I will not only be wanting people who are soft unionists or hardline unionists to vote Alliance, I will be asking people who are soft nationalists and hard nationalists in East Belfast to vote for me. So there's absolutely no electoral gain in me letting down some people who might have wanted to see me on the platform in the SSE arena. I have a diary clash. These things happen.
OK, I just want to be clear about one other issue about the Assembly versus the House of Commons. When Stormont was down for 2 years because of the DUP boycott, you were one of the loudest voices calling for it to come back. You made a lot of noise about the democratic deficit, the impending collapse in public services, and yet, while that challenge is now bigger and in sharper focus than it's ever been, you want effectively to turn your back on the Assembly and head off to Westminster. And your critics might say that is not a great look.
Well, I think that that's an entirely flawed argument, because I'm not turning my back on the Assembly. I would be going to Westminster for the precise reasons I set out, in order to try to bring stability to our finances, which is the major challenge, to try to bring stability to our political institutions, which is the other major challenge, and also to try to ensure that when it comes to decisions around public spending, that Northern Ireland's impact and the impact that it has on our public services is not forgotten. This isn't about whether Naomi Long sits in the Assembly. The Assembly has to function. It has to work. It's not about a job for me. It's about the dysfunction in our institutions. So irrespective of where I sit, my commitment to devolution is unshaken.
Yeah, but if you're successful and if Stephen Farry manages to retain his seat in North Down, and I wonder if you've considered the fact that the Alliance Party has never managed to retain a Westminster seat so far, that would mean that the leader of the party and the deputy leader, both big beasts, both very well-known figures politically, will both be at Westminster. And that will denude your offering in the Assembly.
Well, with all
You're laughing at me calling you a big beast.
I am. I find it quite amusing. Look, Stephen and I, of course, are the leadership of the party.
Of course.
But I was deputy leader when I was there for 5 years. Stephen's been deputy leader for the last 5. The party has structures that manage those connections. We're still intimately involved in what's happening in our local council groups, in the Assembly team, wherever we are.
Of course, but you're the face of the Alliance Party.
Well, I don't agree, actually. I think that there are many faces of the Alliance Party. We have 17 MLAs, all of whom are, I think, punching above their weight, if we're going to talk about big beasts, and I think are really hitting hard in the Assembly chamber. And it's because I'm confident.
Half of your team of MLAs are standing for election to Westminster. Half of them want to leave the Assembly and go to Westminster.
I think that that's a flawed analysis. I think
it's a statement of a fact.
I think what people want to do...
Presumably they're not running not to win.
Of course they're not running not to win,
so
but I think it's a flawed assessment, because wanting to go to Westminster doesn't mean you want to leave the Assembly behind, but it means that you see that there's an opportunity.
Well, you end up double jobbing, so you're making people make that choice.
No, it's a chance for you to perform on a different stage in terms of supporting your constituents and in terms of supporting devolution. And thankfully, we have the breadth and depth of team to be able to make those kind of decisions. And to be very clear, Mark, and it is important to say this, when it comes to how we operate as a team, there are other parties where you could have everybody in the same room and they would still be pulling in different directions. We can manage to have Stephen in Westminster, our Assembly team in the Assembly, and our council groupings in council, and still manage to stay on the same page. So I'm not worried about the coherence of the party's lines at all. OK,
Sinn Féin isn't standing in East Belfast, North Down or Lagan Valley, your 3 top target seats. The party doesn't, I accept, have huge support in those constituencies, but nonetheless, those votes could make all the difference for Alliance if they come your way. Do you welcome Sinn Féin's move, or is it a curse as you canvass, in particular across unionist areas? It
hasn't really been raised with us because it was nothing to do with us. What Sinn Féin decide to do in constituencies, as with every other party, is a matter for them. The important thing, I think, for the electorate is that they know we were not involved in any discussions with any other party about where they would run candidates in advance of this election. I've been very clear about my view on pacts. I've been very clear on my view in those discussions, and we have stayed clear of all that. I'm going to the electorate directly to appeal for their support. Had Sinn Féin been running, I would have been doing exactly the same thing as I'm doing now, irrespective of whether they ran candidates or not.
OK. Do you see Jim Allister as your biggest asset in this election then? What do you make of the slogan, Vote Jim, Get Naomi? Does that have the ring of truth to it in certain constituencies, perhaps like Lagan Valley and East Belfast?
Not at all. I mean, if Jim wants to run in every constituency, that's, again, his prerogative.
But it could help you. It could help you there, because he could take potentially votes off the DUP.
I am pretty certain from my engagements with Jim that nothing he's doing is designed to help me.
So no truth to the Vote Jim, Get Naomi. It doesn't even bring a smile to your face.
No, it doesn't. Well, it's slightly laughable, but no, it's not. It's certainly not his intent, and it's certainly not mine. But
it's certainly not his intent, because he describes the Alliance Party as being made up of crypto nationalists.
I know. I've heard it heckled from behind me in the chamber. But the bottom line
is,
some
unionists might believe him when he says that.
And they can vote for him if they choose. That's the joy of an election. People get to express their opinions. But we'll be standing for what Alliance stands for positive and constructive politics, and for trying to build a better future issue for people. And the TUV, like every other party, has a right to run in every constituency. I think that's healthy. And of course...
Well, it's not running in every constituency.
Well, but I said it has a right to. And they have the right to do that. And I think that's healthy. And so I'm not going to either try to encourage some to stand down or encourage others to stand in places. It's for the electorate to decide.
Yeah, but the reality is you could end up reluctantly and indirectly benefiting from the fact that the TUV is standing candidates this time.
And in other places, for example, in North Antrim, Jim Allister benefited from the fact that he got some transfers from Alliance on occasion.
OK. I caught your party election broadcast on Radio Ulster this morning, and in it you listed examples of the areas in which Alliance has delivered change recently. Now, you mentioned domestic abuse and stalking, religious discrimination in teaching, integrated education, financial transparency, affordable childcare and championing a Green New Deal. And I note that you didn't include in that list the legislation which you pushed through the Assembly to protect the anonymity of alleged paedophiles. Why was that?
Well, I think, first of all, that characterisation of the legislation is false. First of all, I didn't push it through. It went through the normal Assembly procedures. None of them were accelerated or rushed.
Well, you were responsible for it as the Minister. You brought it onto the statute books.
May I finish?
Yeah.
So it wasn't rushed through and I didn't push it.
I didn't use the word rushed. I didn't say rushed.
It wasn't pushed. So it was brought to the Assembly. The Assembly made their decision and they scrutinised the legislation. And ultimately...
You were the Minister responsible for it?
I was the Minister responsible for the introduction of it. My department was responsible for the drafting of it, but ultimately it becomes Assembly legislation. Yeah. I then, in that context, also object to the fact that you're suggesting that it's some kind of paedophile protection law, because that is not what it's about.
No, I know it's not what it's about, but it is part of it.
No, there was a specific requirement in the Gillen Review, which was about the anonymity of people who had not been charged but had been investigated for offences. So these are, under law, innocent people. And the concern that Sir John raised was about how that would be handled. That has now been subject to legal challenge. That legal challenge is completed. I am now reviewing the advice that I have received on this. The judgment goes much wider, actually, than those 4 clauses in that extensive bill.
But the High Court judge who ruled recently on it said
whether or not we appeal.
OK, said scrutiny of the legislation was manifestly lacking. Can you now confirm you will not appeal that judgment?
No, I cannot confirm that.
Why not?
Because for the very reasons I've said, I have sought advice. I have met with senior counsel. There are wider constitutional ramifications of the judgment that was made that go beyond those 4 clauses. So even were I to accept the judgment in respect of those 4 clauses, there are wider issues that need to be addressed.
So you don't think it was flawed in any way? The legislation you don't believe is flawed?
That is not what I said.
Well, I'm asking you, is it flawed in any way?
That is not what I said. I said that I am taking legal advice and that I need to consider very carefully that legal advice because of the wider ramifications of this in terms of constitutional law in Northern Ireland. OK, one Ulster Unionist MLA has made it clear he wants to introduce a private member's bill to overturn the relevant legislation. The SDLP and the TUV have said they would support the law being changed. So clearly there is a move in some quarters in the Assembly to fix the legislation as those individuals that I've referenced there would see it. You're saying you can't tell me whether it's going to sit as it is and you're going to appeal the ruling, or if it might be changed in future? Well, there are 2 separate questions. There are the questions as to whether or not the legislation itself will be changed, and that's one question. And then there is the wider issue of whether an appeal will still happen, and I'm seeking legal advice on that second matter. With respect to the legislation, as it stands, the legislation no longer applies. It's been struck down. So it's not about anybody having to come and strike that legislation down. That's happened in the courts. So the question now is whether or not we put amended proposals forward to the Assembly, and again that's something on which we're seeking legal advice.
Do you accept, just let me boil this down to one simple question, do you accept you were in any way responsible for bad law?
I don't accept that it was bad law, but I do accept that the judge has ruled that the balance was incorrect. However, others took a different view on that same judgment. And I don't want to, if you like, I don't want to litigate via television tonight. These are complex legal questions, Mark. They go much wider than that one piece of law. And given that we produced in that one bill quite a significant change to things around sexual offences and human trafficking, for example, that have been hugely beneficial. I think it is unjust to characterise it as bad law. There is one element which is questioned, and that is whether or not there should...
A lot of the good may have been undermined by the bad.
No,
that's the point, isn't it?
No, I think some of the way this has been handled in the public domain has been unhelpful, but I'm clear that the intent of the law was correct, and that was to protect people being subjected to trial by media.
Yeah, But the reality was that you seemed to believe that not being able to name the likes of Jimmy Savile as a paedophile long after he was dead was good law.
But that was not the intent nor the implication of the law that was passed.
Well, it might not have been your intent, but it was the outworking of it.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. Jimmy Savile could be named in Northern Ireland under the law as it stands.
OK, right.
Or as it stood, I should say, before it was struck down. That, again, is kind of the misrepresentation that I'm talking about.
OK, well, I'm certainly not trying to misrepresent it. I'm trying to represent it very,
but I am trying to be
very carefully and very accurately.
And I am also trying to be very clear, because a lot of this is being done in a way that is almost second-hand, and I need to be really careful around this.
OK.
We have to take legal advice because there are constitutional implications.
I understand.
You've said that.
You've said that.
But the substance of the law can be changed even if the decision is appealed.
Right, OK. On April the 23rd, your party issued a statement to say it was with deep regret that it was announcing that Patrick Brown had resigned as an MLA with immediate effect for personal reasons. Now, it's understood Stormont Standards Commissioner had been investigating a complaint into Mr Brown's conduct towards an integrated school, that a report by the Commissioner was being considered by the Assembly's Standards and Privileges Committee, and that Mr Brown had been due to attend the committee the following day. As well as that issue, there are other incidents which call into question Mr Brown's judgment: 2 reprimands by the local government standards watchdog, a conviction for drink driving, and involvement with a business which went bust, leaving students thousands of pounds out of pocket. Did he at all times, in your view, demonstrate good judgment? And did you demonstrate good judgment when you allowed him to continue to serve as an Alliance Party representative?
Well, look, Patrick is no longer a member of our Assembly team. He is a member as a private citizen, and I have to respect his privacy, and I am not willing to discuss issues to do with Patrick now that he has moved on. I just don't think it's appropriate. And when it comes to issues,
I'm not asking questions about him. I'm asking questions about your judgment.
And I will talk about my judgment.
Right.
But
did you demonstrate good judgment?
I am not willing to engage myself in a discussion around Patrick because I think that's unfair. I'm also, by the way, not willing to engage in a discussion about what may or may not have been happening with the Standards Commissioner, because if I do that,
well, we won't know, of course, because he quit as an MLA.
Well, that is factually untrue, because the Standards Commissioner and the committee, if such a report exists and if such a course of action has been taken, and I'm not allowed to confirm or deny that because that's part of the rules of the Assembly, that these are confidential proceedings, but if such a course of action persists, it's within their gift to be able to continue to publish and to investigate. There is nothing in the statute to stop them doing that, so that is not the case. In terms of my judgment, I believe that Patrick, and I base this on I believe he made mistakes. And I also believe that he paid the price for those mistakes. But he went on and he demonstrated that he was a very effective elected representative. And some of the things that have been said about him, for example, many people will have had businesses that have gone under.
Yeah,
many people will have sold businesses that will have subsequently gone under. And I don't think it is fair to characterise him in the way it has been done in this programme.
Well, I think it's accurate. I don't think you can disagree.
I don't think it is.
I don't think you can disagree with anything that I've just said. The question was about his judgment, and the question was about your judgment as Alliance Party leader to allow him to continue as an elected representative.
And I have made...
Do you think you always made good judgment?
I think I did with respect to Patrick, yes.
You think you always got it right? And at no point was your judgment, should your judgment be questioned?
I have said that I think Patrick made mistakes. I think we were quite robust.
But you didn't make mistakes.
I have said I think we were quite robust in how we dealt with mistakes. But you know, Mark, if we're going to set the bar so high in politics that no one can ever err, that no one can ever make a mistake. Well, if I may finish what I'm saying, if we're going to behave in that way, then there will be no good politicians. Patrick proved himself to us in terms of his commitment, in terms of the hard work he did for his constituents. And I have to say that to some degree, I find it quite objectionable, the degree to which he has been put under the spotlight as a single individual in a way that...
He's a former elected representative for your party.
A former elected representative being the operative part of that sentence.
And that is absolutely right, and that is exactly what I said. OK, we need to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you very much indeed. Next Thursday, I'll be talking to the DUP leader, Gavin Robinson. Let's hear what the Belfast Telegraph's Suzanne Breen and Slugger O'Toole's David McCann make of what they've just heard. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining us again on the programme. Suzanne, we covered a lot of ground there with Naomi Long. What did you make of what she had to say about where the Alliance Party is positioned in terms, first of all, of its capacity to win seats on the 4th of July?
I think she didn't make the mistake of setting the bar very high. She said that Alliance are competitive in 3 seats. I have heard some outside talk that you know, it could be greater than that, maybe East Antrim, maybe Strangford, but she didn't say that. I think Lagan Valley, East Belfast and North Down are winnable. They will be very, very tight. It's impossible to call any of them at the moment, but I think she was realistic. Things could go Alliance's way on July the 4th. They might not, but the party is definitely in with a fighting chance in those seats, and I think she has a really strong chance in East Belfast.
She's got a strong chance in East Belfast. You were both on Red Lines this week, and you said Lagan Valley, David, Lagan Valley's almost too close to call. Have you changed your mind on that at all?
No, I think it is absolutely too close to call. I think Saoirse Eastwood maintain a very high-profile campaign, but then again, so is Jonathan Buckley, the DUP candidate as well. I mean, it's even remarkable that we're even talking about Lagan Valley being too close to call. That was the safest of safe unionist seats. I mean, the combined unionist vote last time was about 65%. So the fact that we're even talking about the potential of Saoirse Eastwood even being a contender, I think tells its own story.
But it is possible, as I said to Naomi Long there, the Alliance Party could win no seats, and it could go back with 3 seats. And if it is 3 seats, people will be talking about the Alliance surge continuing. What about the Ireland's Future event? We talked about that. Should we be surprised that Naomi Long has decided to pull out of that event and to send Nuala McAllister instead?
I don't think we should be surprised that Naomi isn't attending the Ireland's Future event.
She says it's a simple diary clash.
Yeah. And I can understand 2.5 weeks, a Saturday before an election. She's not just a candidate herself, she's a party leader. She's expected to be on tour supporting her party's candidates across the 18 constituencies in Northern Ireland. But the reality is, on the ground, that if Naomi Long went to that event and was photographed beside Mary Lou McDonald and others who very passionately believe in constitutional change, it would be manna from heaven for the DUP. Those photographs and those footage would be plastered all over the place and on social media, and I think it's that real politic that is the reason for her withdrawing. And
presumably, David, as Mrs. Long said herself, it could come down in some of those key constituencies to a couple of hundred votes. Certainly, it could come down to a couple of hundred votes in East Belfast. And she needs to be very careful not to annoy people who could opt to support her on July the 4th.
No, absolutely. In places like East Belfast, I mean, you've got places like Short Strand, again, very strong Sinn Féin areas. Even in North Down last time, the combined Green, SDLP, Sinn Féin vote was greater than Stephen Farry's margin of victory. So yeah, it's the tightrope that Alliance always seem to walk. But I have to say, since Naomi has been leader, she has actually done well in getting soft nationalists over to the Alliance Party and actually locking them in. And she did that in the European election last time quite effectively. So she's done this before. And if they do lose somewhere like East Belfast by like 200-300 votes, maybe the decision to pull out of the Ireland's Future event, we could look at that and probably see that it did potentially cost her the seat.
What about the fact that she is opting to stand for East Belfast? She is a formidable political operator. She is the Justice Minister. The decision to stand in East Belfast and potentially leave the Assembly and go to Westminster clearly wasn't an easy one for her to take, but she says she genuinely wants to be an MP. But if she ends up in Westminster and if her deputy ends up in Westminster, to what extent does that potentially denude the Alliance Party at Stormont? Possibly, of course, Saoirse Eastwood, who's another big hitter in the party, potentially not being in the Assembly.
Well, I suppose it's a nice problem for Alliance to have, and some other parties would perhaps like to have that issue. Yes, there are really talented and capable people, MLAs in Alliance, no shortage of talent, but obviously Stephen Farry and Naomi Long are huge figures, and I think also there may, potentially be issues of party discipline. Without having them there, it's not ideal for them to be conducting internal meetings by Zoom, but obviously she's weighed it up and she has decided that the opportunity potentially to take out not just a DUP MP, but the DUP leader, the leader of Union, to decapitate that party in East Belfast, that is of greater advantage to her party than staying out.
David, are you persuaded by the argument that Naomi Long advances that 1, 2 or 3 Alliance MPs on the backbenches in the House of Commons can actually have an impact on government policy?
I think, look, the majority that we're looking at with Labour at the minute, I think, look, it's doubtful that many of the Northern Ireland MPs will have any massive influence on British government policy. But however, Naomi is right. She was able to point to her previous time in Parliament where the coalition had a majority of around about 80 seats and she was able to get some local changes. But the decision to reform the Assembly, let's be clear about this, will be taken in Stormont. I don't think it will be massively taken in Westminster. That's where the fight will be.
Suzanne, just finally, the challenge of winning votes. This is a big challenge for the Alliance Party, isn't it? Winning votes from Unionists, potentially, and Nationalists, and then getting the party's core vote at a time when a significant number of voters could, of course, be on holiday. None of that is straightforward.
But there's also another issue. I mean, I suspect that there is a lot of disillusionment and apathy in some of the areas that Alliance is contesting among working class unionist voters. And the one thing we do know about Alliance voters is they are very committed and they will come out. But yes, the stakes are high, Mark, in East Belfast for Naomi Long too. Gavin Robinson has beaten her 3 times and I would say she wouldn't want it to be a 4th.
OK, we will leave it there. Thank you both very much for now. We'll speak to you again a little bit later in the programme. Let's focus now on the man who would be Prime Minister. If the current polls are to be believed, Sir Keir Starmer is that man, but what does he know about Northern Ireland? And what would a Labour administration mean for issues like legacy and the constitutional question? Gareth Gordon has been speaking to people who know Sir Keir.
OK, when you're ready.
So just who is Sir Keir Starmer? If anybody should know, it's Northern Ireland.
I'm immensely proud of the work of the board, of that whole period in my life. It's given me a lasting love of Northern Ireland.
I didn't find him cold. I think he's actually quite a warm person, but it's well buried within him.
I've looked into the eyes of the people that we must serve at the Crown Prosecution Service in my work in Northern Ireland.
I don't think that, as it was for some Prime Ministers, the Northern Ireland is going to be an add-on that perhaps they would rather not deal with.
Peace in Northern Ireland.
He served us well in the period that he was here, and Northern Ireland owes Keir Starmer a great deal.
To get one thing straight, Northern Ireland won't be close to the top of Sir Keir Starmer's to-do list if he becomes Prime Minister. But his time as an advisor to the Northern Ireland Policing Board at least means he knows his way around. He will also be able to call on his Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, a former leading civil servant in Northern Ireland and a woman well known to The View.
I think her experience, her ability to understand the nuances of what's going on here, I think will actually be crucial. We've seen with some of the previous Tory administrations in the past couple of years that they just haven't had a handle on really understanding what is going on in Northern Ireland, and they've had a bit of a tin ear when it comes to issues on it. And I don't think that we will see that with Keir Starmer. I think he has enough people around him who have experience in Northern Ireland who will keep him right on that.
It's nearly 18 months since Sir Keir Starmer came here to Queen's University and surprised everyone by making a big promise over the Conservatives' controversial Legacy Act, one which he may find difficult to deliver on if in office.
Direct question, if you are elected Prime Minister, will you repeal that bill?
Yes. But let me...
That was clear enough, though this recent intervention from one of his shadow ministers will alarm many in Northern Ireland.
As Labour comes into government, we will repeal that legislation, but we'll do what's necessary also to respect the service of the veterans too.
But the man who extracted that promise from Keir Starmer says there is a solution.
The fix on this issue is, which has been around for a number of years, is essentially to keep open the justice option, to keep open prosecutions, but to have a situation where instead of people who are convicted serving a maximum of 2 years, you could reduce the jail time to 0. That fix has been around for a while. Under the Johnson administration, they just wanted to get rid of everything, get rid of proper investigations, proper trials and any jail time. So I think there's a landing zone for that bit.
But scepticism remains.
I think what we're going to see is a rather classic political fudge. I think they're going to find themselves in a position where, yes, they will repeal it, but they will struggle to find a solution to this, just as previous Tory governments in the last couple of years have really struggled to find a solution to this. I think you can expect to see that it will be looked at, perhaps, dare I suggest, kicked a little bit into the long grass. I think one of the things that Keir Starmer will not have, if he won't have as much of the Tory right-wing press breathing down his neck to find a solution to this, there won't be an expectation, I don't think, that a Labour government will solve this problem as much as the Tory one.
Stand by. Then there's the issue of the constitutional position. Will there be a border pool under a Keir Starmer premiership?
I don't think we're anywhere near that kind of question. It's absolutely hypothetical.
So it's unlikely.
It's not even on the horizon.
Comments like this have led to criticism that Keir Starmer takes too much of a unionist position. Not so, says the Policing Board's first chairman.
I believe that he has the capacity to build on what he did in the past, which was force good relationships in terms of each of the two identities and to assist in those growing. He also, as I've already said, he knows the importance of fostering relationships, not least on the policing side, but also in terms of the legal side, as well as with politicians, that would be to the benefit of everyone.
But a former vice chairman of the board says Sir Keir needs to go further.
I would hope that he's the person who brings about the debate, that we need to talk to each other, that unionism needs to talk to nationalism, that the Irish needs to talk to the British, that we need to begin to discuss the future of this island in a fashion which we haven't been doing for a long time. We grabbed the Good Friday Agreement and said that's the end of it. But it's not the end of it. If you're going to have referendum, if you're going to have the possibility of referendum, then you have to talk about the future. And I think that if he has any wit, he will be actually pushing forward with challenging us, challenging all people, unionism specifically, because they think if you talk about this, it's all over. Well, that's not good enough.
For the human side of Sir Keir Starmer, we'll leave the last word to Professor Ray. Do you stay in touch with him?
Yes.
Is he accessible? He hasn't forgotten his...
You're asking me, would I give you his phone number? The answer is no.
But you do have his phone number?
I do have his phone number.
Do you use it occasionally?
Yes, now and again.
Yes. And he always replies?
Oh, yes. He's a man. He will display to everyone courtesy, and that's the way he lives.
Gareth Gordon reporting there now. Just time for a final word with Suzanne and David. Suzanne, how much will Northern Ireland feature, do you think, in Keir Starmer's mind if he's successful on July the 4th?
Well, it didn't feature very highly in the Labour manifesto today. I think there was one page out of 131 devoted to Northern Ireland. But obviously there's a lot of people there close to him, including Sue Gray, who have considerable experience of Northern Ireland. I think we will see a much more polished and professional administration compared to the Tories. The years of ineptness, insanity and inanity are gone, but I think it'll be very much the status quo in terms of Keir Starmer. He's not Jeremy Corbyn, and Hilary Benn isn't his father.
Living up to that commitment to repeal the government's legacy legislation, David, will not be straightforward. But we saw him there. He's on the record saying he's going to do that.
Yeah, and the fact that they've put it in the manifesto, I mean, Sam's right. I looked at the Labour manifesto today, and again, it's the only mention in there, so it's in there, ironclad, so they're going to have to move pretty quickly on that. That will be number one on Hilary Benn's agenda, you would assume, as being Secretary of State, and that will be a welcome to the parties here, because one thing that does unite all the parties here is their opposition to the legacy proposals.
Yeah, and that will not be straightforward. Kieran McAvoy explained how it could be done, but it took us a very long time to get to where we are. It's a challenging position that we're in at the moment, and for Labour to move on this, you would imagine will not be straightforward if, for example, the Labour Party wants to keep the veterans lobby on side.
Well, it won't be straightforward, but at least there hasn't been a U-turn on it. A lot of people thought that Keir Starmer, when he opposed the Legacy Act and said that he would challenge it, might kind of back down. He hasn't, and the vast majority of people in Northern Ireland, ordinary people, will be pleased with that, as all shades of victims of loyalists, victims of Republicans, victims of the security forces.
Just a very quick final one. You've been keeping a close eye on Sinn Féin's fortunes in local and European elections south of the border. The party has not made the gains it had been hoping to. Why not? Briefly, David.
No, they expected about 200 council seats. They've got just over 100, although some of the European results have been better for them. They gained Lynn Boylan in Dublin. Kathleen Funchion got in Ireland South. Michelle Gildernew, however, is under the pump in Midlands North West, and we're still waiting for that count to conclude.
OK, well, we'll see if we have it by the morning. Thanks very much both for now. Just a quick word about this weekend's Sunday Politics, when I'll be talking to the lead singer of the hugely successful Northern Ireland band Snow Patrol. Gary Lightbody makes the case for proper funding for the arts.
Really, really vital and important services that should be above the arts. You know, education and healthcare and infrastructure, all these things are vitally important so that we can survive. But we also need reasons to live and reasons to have joy in this world, and I think art is something that brings people so much joy. There's so many extraordinary artists. We have an incredible array, and I know that there's so many that could do with some small help to get them to that next level, and it's very, very lacking. I would gladly speak to the Arts Minister, to the Communities Minister, Gordon Lyons, and have a conversation about how maybe what the future looks like.
Because you obviously believe you would have a persuasive case to make.
I believe that there is a persuasive case to make, that the arts brings so much to any society, to any culture. It's always been that life raft for me, and I think it is for so many people.
It's really interesting stuff. You can see that Gary Lightbody interview in full on Sunday Politics at 10 o'clock on BBC One. And of course, don't forget about our Red Lines constituency profiles. The latest edition of the podcast is available to listen to now on BBC Sounds or wherever you get your podcasts. A reminder too that there's a list of the candidates standing across all 18 constituencies here on the BBC News NI website. And remember, you can catch up with all our leaders' interviews on the iPlayer. For now, though, from everyone in the team, thanks for watching. Good night.